My name is Olivia, and I'm going to tell you the story of how my mother-in-law, Carol, managed to humiliate me out of her house, only to realize that I was the reason she still had a house. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. It's the kind of situation that makes you wonder if some people actively choose ignorance, especially when it comes to their own finances. The whole nightmare started 18 months ago, right after Jake and I got married. Jake, bless his heart, is a genuinely good guy, but he has this massive, paralyzing blind spot when it comes to his mother. He's an only child, and Carol raised him alone after his father passed away when Jake was young. So he feels this overwhelming, suffocating sense of duty to her. This duty translated into us moving into the spare room of her slightly aging, but perfectly nice, 3-bedroom house. The agreement, as loose as it was that we would save up for our own place quickly, and in the meantime, we would contribute toward utilities and groceries. Simple enough, right? Wrong. So incredibly wrong. Within the first week, the atmosphere in that house went from cozy family living to casual emotional warfare, and I was the primary target. Carol had this very specific idea of what a good wife and contributing member of the household looked like, and apparently I wasn't it. See, I work remotely as a freelance digital project manager. It pays incredibly well, better than Jake's steady but modest salary as a graphic designer, but my work isn't visible. I sit at my laptop, I take calls with clients across different time zones, and the money just drops into my bank account. Carol couldn't see the physical labor, the commuting, the hustle she associated with work, so in her eyes, I was simply loafing. The humiliation ritual usually began around 10 a.m. I'd be on a crucial client call, headphones on, trying to sound professional while my back was screaming at me from the terrible chair in the cramped guest room. Carol would stride into the living room, which was adjacent to the guest room, and start her performance. "Jake, sweetheart," she'd boom loud enough for my microphone to pick up every syllable. "Did you remember to take the trash out?" Honestly, I don't know why I bother asking. Some people around here just sit on their keisters all day clicking on things making useless noise, but I have to do all the actual work. I'd mute my mic, close my eyes for a count of 3, and try to look like a statue, hoping the sheer force of my stillness would make her retreat. It never did. If anything, my silence seemed to fuel her fire. One day I was managing a complex software deployment for a tech startup, one of my biggest contracts to date. I was negotiating terms, literally talking about tens of thousands of dollars. Carol walked past and then deliberately stopped and started dusting the bookshelf right behind me. She didn't just dust, she aggressively polished, humming an off-key tune and sighing dramatically every 30 seconds. I had to put the client on hold. I took off my headphones, my voice dangerously low. "Carol, could you please just give me 5 more minutes? I'm in the middle of a major meeting." She looked at me, hands on her hips, with this smug little smirk that just screamed superiority. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Did I interrupt your little game? You call this work? I don't see you bringing home anything but dirty laundry. I'm just trying to keep my own house clean, which is more than some people are contributing around here." That phrase, "not contributing," became her mantra. It was the daily theme song of my life in that house. She'd say it over coffee, over dinner. Sometimes she'd just sigh it dramatically when I was walking by, a passive-aggressive poison dart aimed directly at my self-worth. "Jake works so hard," she'd tell his friends when they visited, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "He pays for everything. His wife, well, she's an influencer or something. Doesn't bring in much, but she's pretty to look at, I suppose." The implication was clear. I was a dead weight, a pretty accessory Jake had unwisely acquired, and now she, the long-suffering mother, was stuck carrying the actual burden of my existence. What Carol didn't know was that I was doing far more than just bringing home dirty laundry. I wasn't just working, I was hustling. I had 2 major retainer clients, plus several smaller side projects, and because I hated the atmosphere in that house, I treated every free moment like a business opportunity, pushing my income higher and higher. And I wasn't spending any of it. Every penny I made, except for my half of the groceries and utilities that Jake and I split, was being saved. I knew that moving out was the only viable escape. But Jake kept dragging his feet. He'd hear his mother's daily insults, he'd see the toll it was taking on me, and he'd just offer a weak, "Mom, that's not nice. Olivia works hard," before immediately retreating to his video games or the garage. He was financially dependent on the easy living arrangement, and emotionally dependent on his mother's approval, even though that approval came at my expense. He was stuck in the middle, but he was choosing the path of least resistance, which just happened to be the one that crushed my spirit daily. The situation came to a head one particularly bad Tuesday morning. I had just finished an all-nighter for a client in Asia, feeling completely drained, and I came into the kitchen to make myself a much-needed protein shake. Carol was at the table, scrolling through something on her tablet, radiating judgmental energy. "Oh, look," she drawled, not even looking up. "The princess finally emerges. Did you work hard, dear? Or were you busy scrolling through clothes online again? Because the electric bill this month was outrageous. Jake and I had to cover it, of course. Maybe if you stopped playing on that expensive laptop and got a real job, we wouldn't have this problem. You know, a job that actually contributes something tangible to the household." That was it. The word contributes. It finally snapped something in me. I was tired of being financially successful yet emotionally shamed. I was tired of being treated like a useless gold digger. I was tired of Jake standing by and letting it happen. I took a deep breath, and instead of engaging in the usual futile argument, I smiled. A genuine, slightly dangerous smile. "You know, Carol," I said, my voice calm, "you keep saying I don't contribute. I think that's a fair assumption if you don't actually know what's going on." She scoffed. "Oh, I know what's going on. You're leeching off my son's hard work." I just shook my head, still smiling. That morning, I made a silent, monumental decision. I was going to secure our exit no matter what Jake said, and I was going to do it in a way that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation about who was actually the financial backbone of this arrangement. I immediately logged onto my banking app. I checked my savings. It was more than enough for a decent down payment on a place of our own. Then I remembered something Jake had told me a few months prior about their house. He mentioned that the rent was due on the first of the month, and that he always paid the landlord, Mr. Henderson, with a check he wrote from his account. But Jake had always been vague about the actual cost, just shrugging it off as, "Mom handles the exact amount." This vagueness, combined with Carol's incessant complaining about money, had always bothered me. I decided to do some digging. I found the contact details for the landlord, Mr. Henderson, in an old file box Jake had left open on his desk. I crafted a careful email inquiring about the process for paying rent, mentioning I was a new tenant with Jake, and that I wanted to ensure the payments were being made on time. Mr. Henderson, a professional and elderly man, replied promptly, attaching a copy of the current lease agreement, which listed the rent amount, and his preferred method of payment, cash or bank transfer. The amount was surprisingly high, higher than I had anticipated, but the most important thing was the due date. The first of the month. This is where my decision became a secret operation. I realized that if I really wanted to move out now and send a clear message, I needed a dramatic gesture. An emotional payoff for all the emotional abuse. The next rent payment was due in 5 days. I pulled out my laptop, got on the phone with Mr. Henderson and introduced myself properly. I explained that I was an auxiliary tenant, and that I wanted to contribute my share of the rent. I asked him if it would be possible for me to cover the entire amount for the next month as a surprise for Jake, so he wouldn't have to worry about it and to apply it against the lease. The elderly man was delighted by my thoughtfulness and agreed to let me handle it. I immediately transferred the full amount for the next month's rent directly from my separate, highly profitable business account into his. The next morning, the financial transaction was complete, locked in, and irreversible. Carol and Jake were utterly unaware that the rent for the house they were standing in, the house Carol insisted she was struggling to maintain while I leached off them, was already paid in full, by the very person she was constantly calling a burden. And the most delicious part? The receipt confirming payment was sitting in Mr. Henderson's files, addressed from my bank account with my name, Olivia, clearly visible on the transfer details. The foundation for my ultimate revenge was set. I knew the moment that information became public, Carol's smug face would shatter. I just had to wait for the perfect catalyst, and knowing Carol, it wouldn't take long for her to provide it. But seriously, before we dive into the next part and see how this secret financial move plays out, tell me, where are you watching this story right now? Drop a comment below and let me know the place and time you're watching. I love seeing where my stories travel. With the rent paid, I settled back into the house, a sudden sense of calm washing over me. I wasn't just tolerating her abuse anymore. I was watching it, waiting for the tide to turn. The humiliation ritual continued, of course, but now her insults felt hollow. When she called me a burden, I secretly thought, your burden just paid your mortgage. Oh wait, your rent, for the entire month. Enjoy the roof over your head provided by the leech. Every sharp word she threw at me now felt like a hammer hitting the rock-solid foundation of my own carefully constructed escape plan. I wasn't leaving without a bang. I was going to ensure that her final toxic attempt to push me out would backfire spectacularly, revealing the truth about who the real contributor in that house was. This was going to be sweet. So there I was, Olivia, living in a constant state of low-grade emotional warfare, but now with a massive, delicious secret tucked away in my bank transfers. The rent for the month was paid, courtesy of the non-contributing wife, and Carol was none the wiser. My mission now was twofold. Endure the remaining few weeks of abuse while simultaneously finalizing our exit strategy, and wait patiently for Carol to deliver the final, self-incriminating blow that would reveal my secret contribution. The setting was crucial to the misery. The house itself wasn't opulent, but it was meticulously maintained by Carol, which she never let me forget. Every knick-knack, every cushion, every perfectly placed photograph of Jake as a beaming toddler served as a silent testament to her motherhood and, by extension, my intruder status. The air was always thick with the scent of lemon-scented cleaning products and passive aggression. The only sanctuary I had was that small, cramped guest room, which I had transformed into my high-powered, high-earning digital command center. Let me talk a little more about Jake because his inaction was the real poison in the well. Jake is a wonderfully sweet, albeit slightly spineless man. He'd come home from his design job, immediately be confronted by Carol's litany of complaints about my laziness. Did you see that stain she left on the counter? She's useless. And he'd crumble. He would literally stand there, his shoulders slumped, unable to form a coherent defense of his wife, or even acknowledge that her constant criticism was unwarranted and deeply hurtful. She's my mother, Liv, he'd whisper to me later when we were alone, usually while I was trying to fall asleep, exhausted from the day's emotional drain. She doesn't mean it. She just worries about money and she doesn't understand your job. She doesn't want to understand my job, Jake, I'd counter, trying to keep the resentment out of my voice. She chooses to believe I'm useless because it makes her feel superior. And honestly, your silence is enabling her. When she calls me a burden right to my face and you say nothing, you're agreeing with her. He would sigh, that deep, self-pitying sigh, and the argument would die there, unresolved. He was living in denial, convinced that if he just kept the peace, everything would magically sort itself out. He couldn't grasp that the peace he was keeping was costing me my sanity. He had been paying a portion of the rent, or at least he thought he was. He'd give Carol a large chunk of money on the last day of the month, which she was supposed to pool with her own contribution and then write a single check to Mr. Henderson, the landlord. This was the system. But because Carol was the sole intermediary and the official payee of the check, Jake had no real insight into the actual financial situation, the true rent amount, or the constant financial stress Carol claimed to be under. This is where my secret job came in. I'd started this freelancing venture when I was still in college, building up a portfolio and client base that had snowballed into a ridiculously lucrative full-time income by the time I married Jake. My business account, separated from our joint funds, was robust. I was bringing in, conservatively, 3 times what Jake was making. Yet Carol saw me on my laptop wearing leggings, drinking coffee, and she assumed I was earning minimum wage doing fluffy, online work. She would often leave job listings for actual in-person minimum wage retail jobs cut out from the local newspaper on my desk. "Look, Olivia," she said one morning, dropping a clipping for a cashier position at a convenience store. "You could start immediately. It's contributing. It's real work. You get to interact with people. Not like that lonely little bubble you live in." I just smiled sweetly and picked up the paper, using it to wipe a spill off my desk before tossing it in the recycling bin. "Thanks for thinking of me, Carol. But my current clients pay me more in an hour than that job pays in a week." I appreciate the concern, though. That made her eye twitch, which was always a small, private victory for me. My emotional resilience was actually starting to irritate her more than my supposed laziness. The emotional connection I was trying to build with the viewers, and that I was trying to maintain with Jake, was constantly being chipped away by this dynamic. I loved Jake truly, but I felt this massive growing chasm between us. I needed him to stand up for me, not for his mother's sake but for ours. The only way I could reconcile staying was by focusing entirely on the long game, saving enough money to buy a house cash and presenting it to him as a done deal. I had set a 6-month deadline for myself to accumulate a massive safety net. The constant abuse actually helped. It made me work harder and spend less, viewing my income as my ticket to freedom. The previous month's rent payment, the secret one, had been made purely for the spectacle of the reveal. It wasn't just about paying the bill, it was about setting the trap. I knew Carol was chronically late on the payments. Jake had hinted at it once, mentioning a few tense calls from Mr. Henderson that Carol always dismissed as the old man being confused. I suspected she was likely using Jake's contribution for other things, maybe padding her retirement or buying expensive items she'd then deny herself in front of Jake, claiming poverty. The fact that the rent was now paid in full on time was going to throw her carefully constructed financial facade into complete chaos. Now a new layer of conflict began to emerge. With her usual financial excuse, "We're barely making rent this month." Temporarily obsolete, Carol had to find a new way to pressure us and more specifically me. She started focusing on household expenses, suddenly becoming obsessed with utilities. "Olivia, did you take another hour-long shower?" She'd shriek from the bottom of the stairs, usually when I was rushing to meet a client deadline. "Do you realize how much water you're wasting? That electricity bill isn't going to pay itself, and Jake is carrying the whole load." It was exhausting. I started wearing sweaters inside to avoid using the heat, even though I was paying half the utility bill. I reduced my shower time to 5 minutes just to cut off her line of attack. But it didn't matter. Her target was me, not the utilities. The secondary challenges were the microaggressions that wore me down. She would accidentally delete files on the shared family computer, knowing I used it occasionally for non-confidential administrative tasks. She'd forget to buy the specific brand of milk I liked, replacing it with the cheaper, expired carton. One day she rearranged my desk setup while I was out, moving my monitor to a bizarre angle and hiding my favorite ergonomic mouse. "I was just trying to organize your space, dear," she said, feigning innocence when I asked her about it. "It looked like a mess." That's what people who don't contribute do. They live in messes. I took a picture of the setup before I fixed it, sending it to Jake with a simple text. "Look at what your mother did." His reply, "Just fix it, Liv. Don't start a fight." That was the deepest cut. He saw the toxic environment she was creating, the deliberate sabotage, and his only response was for me to retreat, to accept the abuse for the sake of his comfort. That's when I stopped waiting for Jake to act. I focused my energy. I had the rent secured. Now I needed to secure a new apartment. I spent my late nights scrolling rental listings, attending virtual tours, and conducting credit checks, all in absolute secrecy. I found a beautiful little one-bedroom apartment downtown, close to the park with fantastic natural light. I signed the lease, paid the first and last month's rent, and scheduled the moving truck for a Saturday morning 3 weeks away. I didn't tell Jake. I couldn't. He would have told Carol, and the emotional explosion would have happened prematurely, robbing me of the poetic justice I was craving. I knew Carol had to escalate her demands soon. The next rent day was approaching, and she needed more money from Jake to keep up her illusion of financial struggle and control. I was ready. I had the paid rent transfer slip safely stored in an encrypted folder on my cloud drive, ready to be deployed. The foundation of deceit that Carol had built was about to be obliterated, and I was holding the detonator. The layering of conflict, the utility complaints, the minor sabotages, Jake's inaction, it all served to build the pressure cooker. And when you leave a pressure cooker on the stove too long, something eventually has to blow. I just needed one more push from Carol to make the whole structure collapse around her. The weeks that followed my secret rent payment and the signing of my new apartment lease felt like walking across a tightrope suspended over a pool of acid. Every day, Carol ramped up the pressure, desperate to maintain her illusion of being the household martyr and me, the dead weight. She was operating under the assumption that the next rent payment was looming, and she needed to squeeze every last drop of pity and cash out of Jake, and by extension, pressure me into becoming her idea of a contributor. Her campaign of terror entered its most aggressive phase, the financial shakedown. One evening, right as we were sitting down to a dinner of bland, overcooked chicken, which Carol made sure to inform us cost a fortune, she launched into her performance. "Jake, we really need to talk about the rent this month," she started, her voice heavy with manufactured anxiety. She always employed this solemn, worried tone when discussing money, which only served to make Jake feel guilty and obligated. Jake immediately looked uncomfortable. What about it, Mom? We gave you the money for our share 2 weeks ago. Yes, your share, she emphasized, making the word sound minuscule and insignificant. But the entire amount, Jake. It's astronomical this time. Mr. Henderson is talking about increasing the rate again next quarter. And honestly, I don't know how much longer I can shoulder this burden. I'm practically working myself to the bone just to keep this roof over our heads. I almost choked on my chicken. Working herself to the bone? She spent her days watching daytime television and organizing her collection of antique thimbles. I held my tongue, carefully studying the expression of mounting panic on Jake's face. But Mom, I thought we budgeted for this, Jake stammered, pulling out his wallet nervously. How much more do you need? I can probably shift some things around, maybe skip that new software license I wanted. Carol sighed dramatically, reaching across the table to pat his arm with a theatrical flourish. Oh, my poor boy. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your work tools because of my financial struggles. But honestly, Jake, the utilities alone are killing me, and with the rent, I need an extra $500 this month just to make ends meet. It's hard enough paying for everything on my own, but now with extra people adding to the strain. She let the sentence hang in the air, her eyes locking onto me with the force of a laser beam. The message was crystal clear. I was the extra person. I was the source of all her financial woes. This was the main problem, the mounting financial pressure she was placing on Jake. But she wasn't done yet. She introduced the secondary challenge, the direct attack on my livelihood. And frankly, Jake, she continued, turning her attention fully to me, I think it's high time Olivia stopped playing on her little computer and found a respectable job. Something with stability, maybe health insurance. Something that actually contributes to the real financial requirements of this house. That little project manager hobby of hers isn't cutting it. It's nice she has something to occupy her time, but we need money, not hobbies. Jake finally spoke up, a weak attempt at defense. Mom, I told you Olivia makes good money. More than me, actually. Carol laughed, a short, condescending sound that scraped against my nerves. Oh, Jake, you sweet summer child. She tells you that, but have you actually seen her bank statements? She has no office, no boss, no badge. That's not a job, that's just wishful thinking. I saw her playing some silly game the other day, clicking away. She's essentially unemployed, and we are footing the bill for her expensive habits. The moral dilemma I faced was whether to snap then and there or to wait. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to pull out my phone, open the bank app, and shove the proof of the rent transfer in her face. But the thought of the glorious public spectacle I had planned kept me rooted. I needed an audience. I needed her to be utterly humiliated, not just silenced. Instead of fighting, I chose silence, a strategy that only infuriated Carol more. I simply finished my plate, deliberately chewed slowly, and maintained a serene, slightly bored expression. Are you even listening to me, Olivia? Carol pressed, her voice rising in irritation. I looked at her, blinked slowly, and said, Yes, Carol. I heard you. You need an extra $500 and you think my job is a hobby. Noted. Then I simply stood up, carried my plate to the sink, and walked away. My detachment was a weapon she couldn't combat with her usual emotional manipulation. But the tension didn't stop at dinner. Carol began her sabotage in earnest, making it clear she wanted me out. Since she couldn't physically throw me out, she tried to make my working life impossible. One afternoon, I was conducting a critical video conference with a major client. I had explicitly told both Jake and Carol I couldn't be disturbed for the hour. Mid-call, just as I was explaining a complex timeline, my Wi-Fi suddenly dropped. It wasn't a blip. It was a full system-wide failure. I spent 20 minutes troubleshooting, missing the rest of my meeting, frantically trying to reconnect via my hotspot. I found Carol in the living room, reading. Carol, did you touch the router? I asked, trying to keep my voice even, though my hands were shaking with rage and fear over losing a major client. She gave me a wide, innocent-looking smile. The router? What's that, dear? Oh, you mean that noisy little box in the hall? Yes, it was blinking so brightly I thought it was malfunctioning, so I unplugged it to give it a rest. You know, to save electricity. We need to conserve, don't we? Since some people aren't helping pay the bills. The rising tension was nearly unbearable. I realized then that she wasn't just being passive-aggressive. She was actively trying to ruin my job, believing I would be forced into that terrible cashier role she had suggested. The next day I had an important deadline to meet involving a massive file upload. I spent hours compressing the files and finally hit upload. I went to the kitchen for a coffee break, and when I returned, my laptop screen was black. Not asleep, off. I hit the power button. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. My stomach dropped. I realized the charger wasn't plugged in correctly. I found Carol downstairs humming cheerfully. "Did you touch my laptop, Carol?" "Oh, that big clunky thing?" "No dear, of course not," she chirped. "I was just tidying up. I noticed you had left the cord hanging right across the doorway, such a trip hazard. So I neatly coiled it up and tucked it safely behind the desk. Did I forget to plug it back into the wall? Oh dear, I must have. But safety first, right? We can't have the only working member of this household falling and hurting himself." I knew it was sabotage. She wanted me to miss deadlines, lose clients, and crash out of my career, thereby proving her point that I was useless. It was a vicious, calculated attack. I retreated to my room, heart pounding. I looked at the moving date on my calendar. Only 10 days away. The tension in the house was a palpable entity, suffocating me. I called Mr. Henderson, the landlord, under the guise of confirming some detail about the lease renewal, but really I was setting the final piece of the trap. "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice low. "I just want to confirm that all payments for this month have been processed and that the account is in good standing." "Yes, Olivia, everything is perfect," the elderly man replied warmly. "That was very generous of you to cover the whole month. It came through right on time, exactly 5 days before the due date. The timing was excellent." "Wonderful," I said. "Now, Mr. Henderson, Jake and I are having a bit of a complicated situation with the current tenant, Carol. She sometimes gets confused about the payment details. If she were to contact you, or if you had any reason to visit the property, would you mind just confirming who exactly paid the last rent installment? And maybe mention that it was paid early and in full." There was a slight pause on the other end, and then Mr. Henderson chuckled softly. "Ah, I see. Some family drama, is it? Well, I'm a simple man, Olivia. I just state the facts. The last payment came from your account on the 25th, and it covered the full amount. If anyone asks, that's what I'll say. The trap was set. All I needed now was the delivery system." I knew Carol, desperate for the extra $500 from Jake and confident in her story of financial ruin, would soon make a desperate attempt to solidify her control. She needed to know Jake hadn't already paid the full rent amount, and the best way to do that was to verify the status with the landlord. The only question remaining was when she would contact Mr. Henderson, and how quickly he would reveal the truth. The climax was imminent, and I was holding my breath, ready for the spectacular implosion of her lies. The house was an emotional powder keg, and Carol, completely oblivious to the wire I had just connected to the detonator, was about to light the fuse herself. The rising tension reached critical mass the following Friday. It was the absolute worst time for Jake. He was preparing for a major client presentation due Monday morning, meaning he was stressed, exhausted, and desperately trying to focus. Carol knew this, and she chose this precise moment to stage her final financial confrontation. I was in my room, finishing up some documentation for my move, mentally ticking off the last boxes, when I heard Carol's voice, sharp and commanding, coming from the kitchen. "Jake, get down here. We need to talk about the rent now." I paused my work, the laptop half closed. This was it. She was pushing for the extra $500 she demanded, probably hoping to ambush Jake before I could intervene. I quietly opened my door just enough to hear. Jake's voice was tired and defensive. "Mom, I told you I'll get the extra money on Sunday. I'm slammed right now. Just give me a few hours." "A few hours? Jake, you think Mr. Henderson cares about your little deadlines? The man is old, he's particular. The rent is technically due tomorrow. We cannot be late again. I had to pay late fees last month because you were so scatterbrained. Do you know how much money that costs me? Money that I contribute. And I'm certainly not getting any help from your wife, who's probably in there watching cat videos instead of looking for a decent job." The betrayal in her words hit me again, even though I knew the game. She had never paid late fees. She was lying to guilt-trip Jake into handing over the cash immediately. And that little jab at my job was the perfect, unnecessary cherry on top of her toxic sundae. "That's unfair, Mom. Olivia works harder than you know," Jake finally snapped, sounding genuinely frustrated, a rare occurrence. "Oh, she works hard. Doing what, exactly? Filing her nails?" "No, Jake. I work hard. I struggle. I am the one who has to make up the shortfall because your wife refuses to lift a finger and contribute to my house." Carol's voice was escalating into a full-blown shriek. This verbal abuse went on for another minute, Jake desperately trying to calm her down, offering to pay the $500 immediately with a credit card, just to silence her. And then the turning point hit, delivered not by me but by fate and a very specific timing. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a gentle, polite chime. It was a loud, insistent, almost impatient double ring. The kind that says, "I'm here on business and I don't have all day." Carol stopped mid-rant, smoothing down her blouse. Who on earth is that? It better not be one of Olivia's strange delivery packages. I swear the amount of money she wastes on frivolous things. She marched to the door and flung it open. Standing on the porch, looking slightly disgruntled and holding a crisp yellow legal pad, was Mr. Henderson, the landlord. Mr. Henderson. Carol's voice instantly shifted from manic rage to sickeningly sweet concern. What a surprise. Is everything all right? Come in, come in. Jake is just here too. We were just discussing the rent, actually, preparing to send the full check out tomorrow morning. The man did not look impressed. He stepped inside, ignoring Carol's invitation to sit, and glanced around the living room. "Mrs. Carroll, I'm afraid there's a slight discrepancy I need to clear up immediately," Mr. Henderson said, his tone formal and businesslike. "I received a rather odd communication this afternoon from my bank about the pending deposit. I thought it best to address this in person." Jake, seeing the serious expression on the landlord's face, walked out of the kitchen looking pale. "Mr. Henderson, what's the issue? Is there a problem with the house?" "No, Jake. The house is fine. The issue, Mrs. Carroll, is the payment status," Mr. Henderson continued, pulling out a folded bank statement. "You just mentioned you are preparing to send the full check out tomorrow morning. Now, I appreciate the honesty, but that's completely unnecessary as the full amount has already been paid." Carol's carefully constructed expression of concerned martyrdom instantly evaporated, replaced by genuine confusion. "Paid? Already? No, that can't be right, Mr. Henderson. I haven't written the check yet. I was just talking to Jake about securing the remaining $500 from him to cover the total amount, because the costs are so high this month." She cast a quick, desperate glance at Jake, who was looking from his mother to the landlord, clearly bewildered. Mr. Henderson frowned slightly. $500? "Mrs. Carroll, the total rent for the month of November is $2,500. Not $3,000. And I received a bank transfer for the full amount of $2,500 exactly 5 days ago. It was paid early, I might add." A wave of rising drama swept through the room. Carol's face was starting to turn a patchy red and white. She hadn't expected him to show up, let alone contradict her carefully fabricated numbers. "A transfer? But I always pay by check, Mr. Henderson. From my account. Are you sure you're not confusing me with another tenant?" She tried, scrambling for control. She was trying to shift the blame to his age, suggesting he was senile or mistaken. Mr. Henderson held up the statement, his brow furrowed in annoyance at her implication. "I assure you I am not confused. My bank statement clearly shows the transfer and the name of the sender. It was not from your account, Mrs. Carroll. It was an electronic payment, sent on the 25th of last month, from an account belonging to a Ms. Olivia, my last name." And there was. The revelation hit the room like a sonic boom. Jake stared at me, who had finally stepped fully out of the doorway. He looked utterly shocked, turning to his mother, then back to me. "Liv, you paid the rent? The whole thing?" Carol, however, completely lost it. The humiliation was immediate and overwhelming. Her meticulously maintained image of the poor, struggling mother being exploited by her useless daughter-in-law was lying in ruins. "No, that's a lie. She doesn't have that kind of money. She sits on her laptop all day. She's playing games. That woman is a burden. She is trying to steal my house from me." Carol shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. All the composure and sweet martyrdom were gone, replaced by pure, ugly rage. Mr. Henderson recoiled slightly from her outburst. "Madam, please calm down. I have the receipts. The money came from her account. It was $2,500, paid 5 days early. You told me just minutes ago you needed an extra $500 from your son to cover the total rent amount which you claimed was due tomorrow. That information appears to be entirely fabricated. He didn't explicitly call her a liar or an embezzler, but the implication was devastatingly clear. Carol wasn't struggling, she was manipulating Jake, likely trying to pocket the extra $500 she was demanding, not to mention whatever portion of Jake's usual rent money she had been diverting for months. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the smell of exposed deceit. Jake finally looked at his mother, not with his usual protective deference, but with a horrifying, sinking realization. The betrayal was real and it wasn't coming from me. I walked calmly into the center of the room, looking directly at Carol, my face devoid of emotion. I paid the rent, Carol. The full $2,500 on time early actually. And I did it because I was tired of hearing you call me a burden and a leech every single day, while you clearly struggle to manage the finances Jake gives you. I looked at Jake, whose face was pale with shock. Jake, she's been asking you for money for rent that was already taken care of. Think about what she was planning to do with that extra money, and all the money you've given her for fees over the last year. The turning point was complete. Carol's web of lies had been publicly shredded by an external, impartial witness, the landlord himself. The drama had skyrocketed and now the confrontation was personal, raw, and irreversible. All the emotional stakes, all the days of silent suffering and abuse, were finally coming due. The moment Mr. Henderson confirmed that the full rent had been paid by me, Olivia, 5 days early, Carol's world completely imploded. The sight of her usually composed, highly judgmental face contorting into an unrecognizable mask of fury and public shame was the exact emotional closure I had been starving for. The air crackled with the sheer force of her humiliation. She didn't react with contrition or even calculated damage control. She went straight to defensive, toxic attack mode. You did this deliberately. You sneaky little viper, she screamed, taking a step toward me, her hands balled into fists. You think you're so clever coming into my house and trying to show me up? Jake, are you going to let your wife stand here and insult your own mother? Look what she did. She manipulated that poor old man. She is trying to kick us out. Mr. Henderson, who was just trying to sort out his accounting, looked genuinely distressed by the sudden domestic explosion. Mrs. Carroll, no one is kicking you out. The rent is paid. I just needed to confirm the source of the payment due to the discrepancy in the numbers you were stating to your son. He then turned to me, sensing the volatility in the room. Olivia, I've settled the matter. I think I'll take my leave now. As he hurried toward the door, Carol tried one last desperate move, physically blocking his path. Don't you dare leave. Tell them. Tell Jake that she doesn't work. Tell them I am the one who struggles. Tell them she is the burden. Mr. Henderson, looking deeply uncomfortable, simply shook his head and maneuvered past her. All I can tell you, Mrs. Carroll, is that the tenant named Olivia paid the rent in full and on time. I don't know about burdens, but I do know about prompt payments. Good day. And with that, the impartial witness to her downfall was gone, leaving us alone in the wreckage. The silence returned, but this time, it was Jake's silence that mattered. He wasn't looking at me and he certainly wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at the floor, processing a massive, systemic betrayal. He was seeing the accumulated evidence of months of manipulation. The lies about the rent amount, the feigned poverty, the constant vicious insults aimed at his wife, all revealed in one devastating moment. Jake, say something. Tell her to get out of my house. Carol demanded, her voice hoarse from shrieking. Jake finally raised his head, and the look on his face was one of profound sadness and disappointment. It wasn't the look of a son supporting his mother. It was the look of an adult who had just realized his entire reality was a lie crafted by the person he trusted most. Mom, you lied, he said, his voice flat. You told me the rent was $3,000 and you needed an extra $500 which you were planning to use my credit card for. The rent is $2,500. And it's already paid. By Liv. Carol's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. It was a mistake. A budgeting error. It's all those extra utilities she uses. Heads up. I was trying to protect you from the true financial burden she places on us. No, Mom, Jake countered, finally finding his spine. That's not budgeting. That's lying. I give you my half every month and you keep telling me how hard you're struggling. But you had the money. You just wanted more money from me. And you did it by constantly humiliating and degrading my wife, telling her she's a leech who doesn't contribute. He walked over to me and for the first time in 18 months he put his arm firmly around my shoulder, a clear sign of alliance. Liv, is this true? All of it? You paid the rent? Yes, Jake, I confirmed softly. I paid it on the 25th, right after your mother told me I was useless and didn't contribute. I used the money I earned from my hobby. I did it because I was tired of being treated like a tenant, and I needed you to see without any doubt who was actually paying for this roof over your head. The twist was complete. The burden was the benefactor. The leech was the lifeline. Carol watched this exchange, her jaw slack. The reality of my secret income, the financial stability she denied, was finally hitting her. She had actively tried to ruin my career, calling it a joke, only to realize that the joke was on her. My job was the only thing keeping her housed. Then came the resolution part of the story, swift and decisive. I looked at Jake, then back at Carol. Carol, you told me to leave. You said I wasn't contributing and that I was a drain on your finances. Well, now you know the truth. I paid this month's rent, but I won't be paying any more. I turned to Jake, pulling a key out of my pocket. The key to the beautiful, sunny apartment I had secretly rented. Jake, I already secured our exit. I signed a lease on an apartment downtown. I paid the first and last month's rent and the security deposit with my hobby money. The moving truck is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. You can stay and try to work things out with your mother, or you can come with your wife and finally start our life together, away from this toxic environment. Jake stared at the key, then back at his mother, who was now weeping dramatically into her hands, but with an eye peering out between her fingers to gauge his reaction. The tears weren't remorseful. They were purely for pity and manipulation. I'm coming with you, Liv, Jake said immediately, his decision firm. He finally chose me. I can't believe. I should have listened to you. I should have stood up for you. The final sweet twist was Carol's sudden, panicked realization of the financial consequences. Jake, you can't leave. What about the rent for next month? Who is going to pay the rent? Who is going to pay for the utilities? We need you. You can't abandon your poor mother, she wailed, abandoning her pride entirely to grasp at his sleeve. Jake gently detached her hand. You have a month, Mom. Liv already paid for November. You have until December 1st to figure out how to cover the rent that Liv was paying without you knowing. Maybe you should try getting a job that actually contributes. He echoed her favorite word back to her, and the pain and shock on her face were incomparable. We walked together into the guest room, Jake finally seeing the full extent of the cramped, uncomfortable space I had been forced to work in. He started packing his bags immediately, his movements decisive and urgent, like a man fleeing a burning building. The entire episode, from the landlord's arrival to my presentation of the apartment key, took less than 30 minutes. It was the swift, brutal resolution of months of deep-seated conflict, proving that sometimes, the only way to win a toxic game is to completely change the playing field, and ensure that when you leave, the person who hurt you is left facing the stark, inconvenient truth of their own actions and financial reality. The resolution wasn't an emotional, tearful reconciliation. It was a quiet, firm act of self-preservation, executed with the speed and precision of a military operation. Once Jake made the definitive choice to leave with me, the atmosphere in Carol's house shifted from volatile rage to stunned, desperate pleading. She realized she had just pushed her main financial support system out the door, not only losing her son but simultaneously losing the secret contribution that was covering the bulk of her living expenses. That evening was surreal. Jake and I packed quickly, efficiently, and silently. Carol followed us from room to room, her dramatic tears replaced by an increasingly frantic, manipulative patter. Jake, think about this. Olivia is making you homeless. She's tearing our family apart over a little misunderstanding about budgeting. Who will walk the dog? Who will help me with the grocery shopping? I'm your mother. Jake ignored her, folding clothes into a duffel bag. The dog is your responsibility, Mom. And I'm not homeless. I'm moving into the apartment Liv secured. It has natural light and no emotional terrorism. I should have done this a long time ago. He looked at me with genuine regret. I'm sorry, Liv. I really am. Seeing Mr. Henderson standing there, exposing her lies, and realizing she was demanding money for rent that was already paid, it finally snapped me out of it. And knowing you paid it while she called you a leech. I feel sick that I didn't defend you sooner. We're moving forward, Jake, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. That's all that matters now. We stayed the night, sleeping with one eye open, but Carol didn't try anything physically aggressive. She simply retreated to her room and began what sounded like a series of increasingly agitated phone calls, likely trying to secure a sudden emergency loan or someone to move in to replace us. The final twist came the next morning, promptly at 8 a.m. Our pre-scheduled moving truck arrived. Carol, who had clearly stayed up all night worrying, was immediately at the window, watching the two burly movers efficiently start loading our belongings, which admittedly were not many since we were essentially living out of a spare room. She rushed out onto the porch, clutching her favorite silk robe around her. What is this? You hired a moving company? You really are leaving? What about our lease? The lease allows for tenants to move out, Carol, I said calmly, zipping up the last suitcase. And the rent is paid for the next few weeks. You have plenty of notice. As we walked out the front door, Jake paused. He looked at the house, the place he grew up in, and then at his mother standing on the porch looking small and defeated. Mom, he said, his voice flat. I'll change the address on my mail. But don't call me looking for financial help or to complain about Liv, ever again. If you call, it has to be to apologize genuinely for how you treated my wife. We got into the Uber to follow the moving truck to our new place, leaving Carol standing alone on the porch of the house that I, the burden, had saved from an impending eviction notice, which I later found out Mr. Henderson had been preparing due to Carol's long history of late payments and partial checks. The quiet exit was the perfect antidote to the years of drama. Our new apartment was small but sunny, peaceful, and entirely ours. Jake finally saw the full extent of my income when he looked at the details of the lease and the wire transfer receipts. He realized that the woman he thought was a financial liability was actually the family's financial powerhouse. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. The silence lasted only a week. Then the text started. Carol, text message 9 a.m. Jake, the electric bill is due. It's so much more expensive without you here. You need to contribute. Jake, reply, that's your responsibility, Mom. Carol, text message 11 a.m. Olivia, this is your fault. You took my son away. You are a terrible person. You ruined my life. I blocked her number without a word. The calls started next. First to Jake, begging for money, then to me from unknown numbers, demanding we return. She was terrified of the approaching end of the month when the rent, which she had been shorting and manipulating for months, would be due again, and there would be no extra payment from the burden to cover her shortfall. Jake finally called her back 2 weeks later. He told me the conversation was brief and painful. I asked her if she had found a way to pay the December rent, Jake recounted to me later. She just started screaming at me, calling me an ungrateful son and blaming you for everything. She didn't apologize, Liv. Not once. She just wanted the money. That sealed the door shut. Jake changed his primary phone number. We moved on with our lives, building a quiet, successful, and financially secure future together, funded entirely by the income Carol had ridiculed as a hobby. The beautiful irony of the situation is that Carol was so fixated on her image of me as a financially dependent leech that she was completely blind to the fact that I was the only thing preventing her from facing a financial reckoning. She wanted me to leave her house because I wasn't contributing, and I did only after I had contributed the one thing keeping her housed, ensuring that my departure would leave her with an immediate and unsolvable financial crisis. She got exactly what she asked for: my absence. I heard through a mutual, very distant family friend about 6 months later that Carol had to take on 2 part-time minimum wage jobs, the very type of contributing jobs she had cut out and left on my desk, just to cover the inflated rent she was now paying alone. The house was sold a year later. As for Jake and me, we flourished. Our relationship, once strained by his inability to protect me, became stronger than ever. He finally saw the cost of his inaction and committed fully to our future, recognizing that our home was defined by mutual respect and support, not by his mother's toxic control. We went from being forced tenants in a stressful environment to homeowners who chose our own peace. And all it took was a little secret financial planning and a very public, spectacular revelation by a confused landlord. So, if you like this story of silent suffering, ultimate revenge, and well-deserved justice, please drop a comment letting me know what your favorite part of the twist was. Like the video and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.